to a live stream. What can I say? So we're putting this straight out onto the internet with no preparation whatsoever, which is exactly the opposite of the thing that we teach. We should always be prepared. We should always do some form of planning beforehand. What are we going to talk about today, Roy?
It's perfect preparation prevents piss poor, particularly
poor performance.
Particularly poor performance. We literally just got in there with, well, about 90 seconds late. So I guess our viewer would have caught it off by now.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we're going to be inundated with literally a letter of complaint.
A letter, 95p for first class if they wanted to arrive tomorrow. 95p.
Bloody hellfire. First class mail, something I've never been accused of being. Right, there we go.
Was you ever a stamp collector?
No, I've never been a philatelist.
Yeah, I was trying to think what the word was. I knew it began with F, but I thought if I get it wrong, we could get banned from Restream. So,
well, yes, it's yeah. Anyway, never mind. Not to worry. I think today, and probably quite appropriate considering the level of humour that we've already exhibited, we're going to talk about objections, aren't we? Or at least being objectionable or not being objectionable.
Without being objectionable. Now, I mean, the thing is, in Sandler, we don't talk too much about objection handling, and I know there are people that make livings out of it. They do courses, objection handling courses, and for me, objection handling is literally a euphemism for fighting with the prospect. Oh, there we go. A euphemism for fighting with the prospect. Why would you even want to do it?
Well, I mean, who hasn't had a great relationship that started with a fight? No, nobody. I mean, let's be honest. It's not a healthy way to start any relationship. And I guess if we're looking at this, from a sales perspective, which is really what we're talking about today, then objections in that context really are seen as the sorts of things that a prospective client might bring up during the course of a sales process, which derail the sales process, or they're bringing them up with potentially the express purpose of derailing the sales process because they somehow want an escape route. They want to get out of where they are, which usually speaks to the fact that they don't necessarily trust what's going on. It strikes me as a trust failure.
Yeah, to trust or believe what's going on, because I mean, when we're salespeople, we for the few who actually use the sales process, we do all the right things to make sure that we find the right information to determine, does it make sense at any stage for us to do better, and this is the thing. I mean, when do objections typically happen, Matthew? When do they get these stalls and objections, reasons not to move forward or just derail? When do they typically happen?
Well, they can happen throughout any kind of interaction. And actually, the very first time you typically see something which you could argue is an objection is literally second one, when you pick up the phone and you talk to a stranger. Because the very first thing that they do is, well, tell you something that isn't necessarily the truth. I mean, how many times has it ever happened to you where you've picked up the phone and and somebody who's the stranger answers and says, they realize that you're not somebody they know, and they go, "Oh, I'm just in a meeting." No, you're not. Otherwise, you wouldn't have answered the phone quite clearly. So, I mean, that's an objection. It's basically it's telling something that is a truth, a half truth, or an untruth, just to be able to get out of a situation in a socially acceptable way. And that's really what we're looking at here. And it's because they don't necessarily instantly trust you, because they think, oh, it's a salesperson. They're going to coerce me into doing something that's against my best interest, which, of course, is not what we're here to do. We're here to add real value, and that means that we have to establish what value means in their world, etc., etc., etc. So it's a difficult thing, but it happens throughout, basically.
I mean, once we get into a conversation, a sales conversation, and objections, as you rightly say, can happen anywhere through the conversation, but more often than not, they occur towards the end of the sales process, when you've put all the work in and the hard sweat and the quotations and the follow-up meeting and the follow-up calls. And this is really interesting because what I found, I don't know if you use the same, but what I found is when people hit me with an objection or a stall, it was never the first time. And I'd heard it before. And I spent most of my sales time under a little bit of pressure, desperately hoping that they was not going to hit me with that objection. And then when they did, it's like, oh, and I still not got an answer for it. And the whole thing, it's like taking a block out the middle of a pile of, a pile of wood, and it all goes Jenga on you. It's you've done a lot of work, meetings and in the olden days, meals and a little bit of socializing, all the nice stuff. And then they pull out that bit in the middle that you was hoping they would never mention, and Jenga.
Well, and hope is always a great strategy, right? Because sitting there praying that something isn't going to happen always works. Listen, not alone. I've 100% been there myself. But isn't it weird and wonderful that actually, if you bring up those things that maybe are going to come up, you hope and pray they're not going to, but they're going to come up, then that has two effects. Number one, you've brought it up so you can actually bring it out and deal with it nice and early. And number two, actually, because you are the salesperson, but you're bringing up the things that actually might be their problems, well, doesn't that just build your credibility? So it actually builds towards that trust side of things, because if you are prepared to say something that is apparently not in your own best interest, well, the last thing you are is a coercive, pushy salesperson, right?
And you're absolutely right, and it's like the old adage about where does the car crash start? Does it hit when does the car crash start when you've sort of hit the tree, or does it happen a few miles back when you decided to, I don't know, have that extra beer, not get your tires replaced, any sort of ignore the fact that it's icy? Where did the car crash happen? And quite often objections happen at the end, but the car crash never happened there. It happened much earlier on, not because of what you did, but because of what you failed to do. And if you're looking from the prospects side of a sales conversation, these objections rarely happen at the moment they voice them. Mm-hmm. They were there before you had the first meeting, and they were the I guess an exit strategy. And if you wait to put a whole load of effort into a sales call, only to find they had an exit strategy ready for you before it all started, it's a waste of time for you. They might have got some free consulting out of it. Mm-hmm. And learned a lot about your stuff and got education out of it. But ultimately, you're not heading to the bank.
I think that's fair. Ultimately, the bottom line of all selling is to, have some form of a transaction where you do end up, going to the bank. But ultimately, that should always be done on the right basis, that actually your client, now hopefully your client, no longer a prospect, is actually getting the real value and meeting his or her objectives, the things that they want, the outcomes that they want. So really, it comes down to establishing that trust and genuinely listening, actively listening, empathetically listening to what it is they really, really need, so that you are understanding, not only understanding how they feel, but actually feeling how they feel to a certain extent. So it's genuine empathy, not just cognitive empathy, but going a little bit deeper than that to affective or emotional empathy, as it's known. So you get to properly hear and understand them, so they actually feel like you're on their side of the table. So you are actually, I know this phrase trusted advisor is a little bit overused, but actually it's kind of applicable here. It is about being that trusted advisor, so that they know that you've genuinely got their best interests at heart. And actually, if it's not right for them, if your solution isn't the right solution to get them towards their outcome, actually you'll walk away. And I think one of the key things we teach in Sandler, a thing called the upfront contract, and a key feature of the upfront contract is the mutual power of veto, which means that you establish explicitly upfront that both of you have got the right to say no. And in fact, you both will say no if it's not right. And really the whole purpose of this meeting is to discuss and to discover whether or not the solution is the right fit for them. And if it's not, then you will walk away and you'll park it. And mutual power of veto establishes equal business stature, and it also gives you a real sense of trust and a real sense of bonding, which is kind of where any objections that then do come out actually can be discussed more sensibly and more intellectually, rather than getting into what basically can be a bit of a bun fight.
Yeah, that, I mean, what could happen, and not to anyone who's watching now, but when you hit these objection, you have that little switch that takes you into justification mode, which is just another way of saying that whatever you objected to, you're clearly an idiot, and here's how I'm going to out argue you, and that can never, often doesn't end up well. And we don't want to be doing that, because I guess the key to a long-term, mutually profitable relationship in sales is making sure that you both have each other's best interest at heart. And with that gives us an acceleration to an outcome, and the outcome might not be that we sell stuff. It might be that we walk away, we part as friends, and live to meet another day. And I think that if we can get that level of mutual trust by being open and honest and say, here's what I've seen in the past with these sort of things. Let me give you an example. If we hear, and for the listener, I think there's one listener on at the moment. For the listener, if you hear an objection multiple times, your job in professional sales is to note that objection down and bring it early into a conversation in that type of conversation. And I think that's something that salespeople are particularly bad at. They just hope it never comes up. And I know I was certainly guilty of that. But if we can bring that objection and lay them out, multiple objections, lay them out on the table really early in our conversation, say, experience tells me that in this situation, in this context, these are some of the things that might be troubling you. And it's this, and it's that, and it's the other, and it's this extra thing. Is this something that it's worth talking about now, before we get into the nitty-gritty? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a Sandler rule, which is that if there's a bomb, defuse it before it blows up. Personally, I like the slightly more, shall we say, aggressive version of that, which is let's blow it up nice and early, but make it a controlled explosion so it blows up on your terms, not on their terms, and that means you don't get hit by the shrapnel.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, I think because these objections are usually formed before you walk in the door or walk in the Zoom. If we get them out there and just demonstrate, here's some of the things that could cause this interaction to stop. Let's deal with them up front. I think is a great way to develop a long-term relationship, and I think we've all done it accidentally. And I think when I look at the clients that we've got and the processes that we put in place, I think it's rare when someone says, I've never done any of these things ever. They quite often say, I do some of these things some of the time at some level of quality, but I don't do them consistently, and I don't plan them out, and I don't always make a great job. So the results are inconsistent. That old Morecambe and Wise thing. And most people here be too young to remember Morecambe and Wise. There's a scene where Eric Morecambe's playing the piano. He's making a right cacophony. And the conductor comes up to him and says, you're playing all the wrong notes. And he goes, no, I'm playing all the right notes, just not necessarily in the right order. And that can mess a sale. That can completely destroy a sale. Even though we're playing all the right notes, if we don't do it in the right order, it'll take longer than we want. It can get more combative than we need. We can waste a lot of time and still not get anything. And in sales, time is our non-renewable resource, and we need to maximize that.
So who knew? Following a consistent process, a consistent system, consistently gets consistent results. I mean, there's a thing. It'll never catch on. What can I say?
Consistency. What can you say?
It's a brilliant Bruce Lee quote, isn't it? Long-term consistency beats short-term intensity.
Yes. One of his best phrases, and I think it applies to this as well. When someone says, "What's the best way to avoid a punch?" and he always said, "Be somewhere else."
Yes, absolutely, and that definitely applies to the objection handling thing. And I think to the point you just made there about justification. The minute you find yourself justifying something, well, best case scenario is you're going to give away your expertise for free. That's the best case scenario, and that's bad. Worst case scenario, whilst you are doing so, you look like you've got something to justify, which means that you look like you are now trying to persuade somebody of something. And the minute that somebody feels like you are trying to persuade them of something, there is a psychological barrier in their brain immediately. It's a cognitive bias, a heuristic called reactance, which basically is part of our evolutionary hardwiring, which means that we will always try to avoid something that is a threat. And the minute that somebody tries to push us into doing something, we push back. Hard sales is good for one thing and one thing only: hard pushback. It's just not a smart thing to do. It doesn't work in congruence with the human brain. You may occasionally land a sale and therefore congratulate yourself on how bloody brilliant you are at selling and what a great persuader you are. No, you got there by accident. You don't know why they bought off you. People buy for their reasons, not for yours. Don't kid yourself otherwise. Show up like a grown-up, actually have a proper conversation with them, treat them as an equal, and you might even form proper relationships that last. You're selling for a marriage, not for a wedding night.
I love that. Show up like you're a grown-up. I like that.
Sorry, did I get on my hobby? I got on my high horse there. I do apologize.
Yes.
I was a bit ranty, wasn't I? Sorry.
Yeah, no. Listen, we can do that. Less rant. We're okay with this. Show up like you're a grown up. I certainly like that. And something else that you said, which triggered something, was if the objection comes too late in the conversation. You're absolutely right. We tend to react and we tend to get desperate and needy. And this is something you said before, if you're needy, you're weedy. Was that the line?
That is a phrase that I used, yeah.
Yeah. And we tend to react. Whereas if we take that objection and we lay it out on the table early on in the conversation, that these sort of things might be mulling around in your mind, we're actually responding to something. We're taking away the objection because we're dealing with it nice and early, and we can have a better quality conversation. And a better quality conversation in a sales environment can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? If it turns out to be a genuine problem rather than a smokescreen, well, isn't it better to find that out soon? Because if it's going to be a no, N-O, you want to know K-N-O-W as quickly as possible, right? Why would you want to waste both their time and yours? It's disrespectful.
It is absolutely disrespectful, and we've now got a marvelous opportunity with Zoom, Teams, to have these conversations with and qualify and disqualify very early, which I think has got to be good for everyone. And then we do have a resource problem out there for just about every job there is. I've just come back from the US, and I'm seeing, as you drive around, you see outside companies, outside shops, garages. I mean, if I was in the US, I'd go into business making hiring signs, because there's a huge market, hiring signs, and there is a resource problem, and it is global. If we can save time and make our prospective or prospective clients more efficient, that has to be a mutual win. If we don't have to go out, because this is never going to go anywhere, the 40p a mile. I've got to ask a question. Can I just go off on one?
Please do.
I went to get some diesel yesterday, and my local garage has run out of diesel. And I looked at the numbers, And I've only been out of the country a couple of weeks. I mean, something clearly has happened. There was no diesel as it happened, but how does that 45p a mile equate now to these new petrol prices? It's got to be hurting the people who are driving, and it's got to be hurting. Well, it probably isn't hurting the company so much. They still want you out, but I mean, how's that going to work in the future, you think?
Well, there's an interesting question, isn't there? I mean, I guess
We'll come back to that.
having a fuel allowance rather than having 45p a mile basically always used to mean that every time I went to fill up and there'd been an increase at the pump, I thought, oh, I've just had a pay increase, because there's definitely differences of ways of working, and I'm fairly sure that anybody who's got a bag carrying rep or a team of bag carrying reps out on the road right now, if they're actually signing off their expenses and they got a fuel allowance, they're probably weeping every day. Here's a tip. Zoom's cheaper than fuel right now.
Oh, absolutely. So qualifying and disqualifying becomes an even more important part of what salespeople do, and understanding the trigger to disqualify or move on to the next step. Gate selling, which we talk a lot about. Maybe we should bring that up another time.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Yeah, we should talk about
a little bit about gate selling. I'll tell you what, I'll make a note.
Yeah, good idea. You mean we do a bit more preparation for the next one? Well,
yeah. Well, we've both been on his holidays. So back to objection handling. Objection handling, when done correctly, where we are responding rather than reacting, can be a real gift for both our organisation and the prospect, and we are showing respect for their time. And I think in about 20 minutes we've covered most of what needs to be covered. We don't need to give you day-long courses on objection handling. There isn't that much to it.
Yeah. Get out in front of it, basically, isn't it? I mean, if there's a bomb, defuse it before it blows up. And I mean, I guess all of this goes to that trust thing, though, isn't it? And ultimately, it is about if they don't trust you, well, there's only one reason for that, and I'm afraid the reason is that same person that you see every time you're shaving in the morning, or you're putting on your makeup, or whatever it is that you're doing in the mirror first thing in the morning. You've got to look in the mirror for what is it that I didn't do, or what is it that I did do that meant that I showed up wrongly, so that actually this person didn't see me as the trustworthy person that actually I am. And it can only be the way that you showed up, because the only thing you've got control over is the way that you show up and how you behave. You can't control how they behave. You can't control what they think or what they do or how they act. You can control yourself. Own 100% of your 50% of the interaction. That's the simple rule. So, if the Sandler rule number 38, which is the problem the prospect brings you is never the real problem, if that's a truism, which it is, and if there's the old all buyers lie all the time, all buyers are liars, which is another Sandler rule, which is also a truism, is also there, it's because of the way we've showed up. We haven't established that trust. We haven't established the bonding and rapport. And to your point, it's all about how we set this thing up in advance. You've got to build a real relationship, which is based on real trust. And to do that, you've got to be trustworthy. You've got to make them feel safe.
I think we're sort of very much hindered on what people think about the sales industry. There's a lot of people who don't know how to follow a professional process. They follow what they see as some process, and actually, if you're watching this and you're a sales manager, it might be a really interesting exercise to go through with your staff when you get into a sales meeting, is to say to them, I'd like you to write down your sales process that gets you to a successful conclusion, and then swap papers. And just see what we've got, and I think unless you've got an embedded sales process in an organization, I think you'd be shocked by the results. I know when I've asked this question, I was shocked and not always, but sometimes. I think you mentioned it earlier. We win deals despite what we did, rather than because of it.
Absolutely. Very, very true. Well, as we're sort of coming towards the end, there's a couple of things that
Yes,
dropped
we are.
into the chat here. Shall I just have a
I
quick
can't see
review?
the chat. Yeah, bring them
I've
up. Bring them
got
up.
the chat here, so I'll put my glasses on, and I'll see what we've actually got here. So we've got a couple of hellos there. We've got one from Richard and one from Nikki. Hello there, both of you. We've got Chris Hughes. Objection handling's the fun part. Getting the opportunity to dig deep in a slightly challenging way. I always see it as game on. That's an interesting one, Chris. There, I think I like the idea about digging deep, but here's an idea. If we to maybe approach it with the early approach that we're talking about, the getting out in front of these objections before they actually get raised, and maybe even you raise them yourself, then actually the opportunity to dig deep can come from actually getting permission to ask those slightly more challenging questions, but to do so in a nurturing way that actually doesn't require them to actually throw up an objection or a smokescreen that you knock down and actually get into almost a combative situation. If you can do it in a more nurturing, collaborative way, then actually the results are more consistent and actually more predictable as a result of it. Well worth a chat about that, Chris, if you're ever up for it. Very happy to have a conversation about it. Nikki says, always love the Sandler perspective I can't read even with my glasses on objection handling. I don't hear many sales trainers and experts encouraging proper relationships and avoiding diminishing the perspective of a prospect like you both do. Thank you, Nikki. Really appreciate that. That's a great comment. And I'm glad that what we're saying is resonating.
That's brilliant. Thank you everyone for contributing. We're just about done now. And there's Mark. Hello. Working through the objections provides the company with an insight in how we can work together. Yeah, it's and I think that's great. Wouldn't it be good to actually do that right at the beginning? Do you think you could have a better conversation if you take the typical objections, lay them out in the table, and get that perspective early? I think the quality of the conversation could take a real positive turn, and I guess one of the ways that we can do it is as we start the meeting and say, look, Mr. Prospect, we don't really know each other. This is our first meeting, or the early get together. I'd like to talk about a number of things that are typically here. And some of these may apply to you and some may not. And if they don't, we won't talk about it. But if they do, maybe we should chat before we get into the nitty-gritty. Does that make sense? And this is permission-based selling, right? Does that make sense? And then go from there and see what the conversation looks like. And I think it's incredible how much the conversation will open up when you allow people to voice their fears nice and early.
Very good. Excellent. Lovely. It feels a lot like we're coming towards the end of our half hour there. I'm sorry for those of you that were expecting us to be bang on 10:15. I think we did start about 90 seconds late, but
amateurs
finish about 90 seconds late as well. So there you go. We're at least stuck to our upfront contract of half an hour. Roy, it's been an absolute pleasure. What are we going to talk about next week? You made a note.
I mean, this is all random, isn't it? We should plan this better. But I thought we'd talk about some gate selling next week. Let's see what gate selling's all about, and have a quick chat and get people's perspective. I'll tell you what we should probably do is advertise this a little bit better, and to get more people in there. But I really appreciate you joining us, Richard, Nikki, Mark, Chris. As we've seen on the chats, really do appreciate you coming along. And if there's anything you want to talk about, if you think we should talk about something else, something that's burning in your life, please let us know, because otherwise we don't want to dry up. That would be embarrassing.
Not that we ever do. As you can tell, we can fill half an hour very easily. And don't worry, Mark. There you go. Cold lead development techniques, Mark says. I like that. Straight in there with the suggestion as well. Nice one. Thank you very much.
God, I'm going to make a note. Cold lead
development techniques.
I don't even know what that means.
I guess it's techniques for developing cold leads. Just randomly reordering the words so that we can actually work out the names.
I tell you what, Mark, roy.johnson@sandler.com. Send us a quick email, and we'll have a look at that for you.
Yeah, nice one. And if you want to get in touch with me, mdh@sandler.com. Don't worry, you don't have to write my full name because, my goodness, you get a repetitive strain injury trying to type my name. It's that bloody long. How else can they get in touch with you, Roy?
We're on LinkedIn.
Yeah, yes, we are.
Mobile. 07 867 525 868. How can they get in touch with you, Matthew?
Oh, did you know what? I've got a mobile phone as well. It's 07715 269 724. Who knew? Fantastic.
We've got all the latest tech. We don't understand most of it, but we've got it.
I haven't got a fax. I don't know if that's a thing, but anyway.
I remember when faxes were new. That's how old I am. And we went from telex to fax, and I thought, this is absolutely awesome.
Here's a really nerdy fact. Did you know the fax was actually invented in 1894? So I don't think you can remember when they were new.
My mother-in-law can.
Yeah, all right. There you go. Nice one. Very good.
Right, we should get off ski. Thank you, everybody. Right. And we'll see you next week and see what stuff we can blather about then.
Beautiful. All right. I shall see you then. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye from him, right?
And goodbye for him also.